Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. If it's your first time looking at this, we are going through and just studying the Gospels in chronological order, and we're doing this and looking at the life of Jesus and how he was with people. And so, if you want, subscribe to our channel. You can go back and catch up on the videos. They're not very long. We do about 5 to 10, maybe 15-minute video a day, and we also have a study group that we're part of. If you want to sign up for that, you can look in the description and do that as well. And so today we're looking at Jesus talking or teaching about anger, and we're still in the Beatitudes. We're still looking at the Sermon on the Mount, not the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes was part of Sermon on the Mount. We're still looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and we're still in Matthew 5, and we're going to be here for a couple of weeks looking at the teachings and trying to dive down into them that Jesus gives and talks about. And in the first one, or the first section here, verse 21 through 22, 21 and 22, he talks about, you've heard that your ancestors told you should not murder, right? You should not commit murder. It's part of the Old Testament, or I'm sorry, the Ten Commandments. And, Jesus says, yeah, and he does this. He's going to do this teaching, and with him doing this teaching, he's not saying that I know better or something. He's saying, like, you've heard it said, but I say, and he's given the meaning behind why we are giving, like, why he's giving these teachings and diving down into these teachings, because they were going to, like, oh well, as long as I don't murder someone, I'm good. But it's not good to have anger in your heart or hate in your heart. And so he's diving down into it. And so he says, you've heard it said that if you commit murder, you're subject to the judgment. But he says, I say, if you're angry with someone, you're subject to the judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fire of hell. And it's like, wait a minute, man. I mean, I got a little angry. I don't think that's gonna. But what he's talking about here, and he's diving in on, is the things that lead up to murder, right? The things that lead up to the point where you would want to kill someone, and it's the anger behind it. And so he's saying, look, these things are just as dangerous as murder itself, because it's what leads, it's what brings you there. And so you need to make sure you don't even start this. And so, so this is what he does. And so the Pharisees, they would read the law, right? They read the law, and they felt, well, not having literally murdered anyone, they felt they had obeyed it. I haven't murdered anyone, so I've obeyed the law. And yet they were angry enough to where they were going to have Jesus killed. Now, they weren't going to do it themselves, and so they were using this as a loophole to say, oh well, we're angry with Jesus, we're mad at him because he's challenging us and challenging our authority and our power, so we're going to work to have him killed, but we're okay because we didn't literally murder someone. And so Jesus saying, look, if you get to the point to where you're angry enough to where you even think about murdering someone, you're in danger of being subject to the judgment and the fires of hell. And so when we miss the intent of God's word, right? We read these rules of living without trying to understand, how he made them. So we've got to make sure that we don't get caught up in this kind of stuff. Well, and I've seen this. Kids are really good at doing this. It's like, well, technically I didn't do this. And it's like, well, that wasn't the whole meaning behind the law. I talked about this, I think it was yesterday. Most of the meaning behind a lot of the rules, or I say rules, the laws that were given, the commands were given, a lot of the intent of them is not for ourselves, but a lot of it's just to protect other people too. Right? You look at a lot of the things a lot of the sins that we're told not to commit, and a lot of them we're told not to commit because not only does it hurt us, but it hurts other people. And so obviously murder hurts other people. And so that was the intent behind a lot of it. And so, but killing is terrible, right? It's a terrible sin, but anger can be a great sin as well. And so we've got to make sure, and the anger that Jesus talked, because people are like, well, didn't Jesus sin when he got angry in the temple? No, the anger that Jesus is talking about here is like a seething, like, bitterness against someone, right? It's just, I hate this person, I want to murder this person, right? That's dangerous, because if you dwell on that too long, or you allow that to go on too long, then it can actually lead to action that you don't want to take, right? Someone can push you over that edge, and you don't want to end up accidentally hurting someone, or worse, right? And so this is the kind of stuff that Jesus talked about. Jesus's anger he was angry at the situation, and he took care of the situation, but he didn't sin in his anger. And so, whereas human beings, it's very hard for us to do that. It's very hard for us not to sin in our anger. And so self-control is good. And then there's a point of this, but self-control is good. But what's even better and what God wants us to practice is thought control, right? Because our thoughts ultimately push us in the direction that we're gonna. I forget who said it, but it's like you're gonna move in the direction of your strongest thoughts. And if your strongest thoughts are, um, I hate this person, I'm gonna kill this person, so you're gonna move in that direction, right? But if your strongest thoughts are, I don't like this person, but you know what, I'm gonna forgive them, I'm gonna move on away. Doesn't mean you got to go be their best friend, and that's not what we're talking about. But you've got to say, you know what, I forgive that person, I'm moving on, and that helps control. You're going to move the direction of your strongest thoughts, and that's what God is telling us here. And then ultimately, He's saying we're going to be accountable for our attitudes as well, right? Not just our actions. If your actions, you may obey all the rules through your actions, but if your attitude is still mean and hateful and also, then that's not good. And so, your actions can say a lot of things, but your attitude will say a whole lot more about yourself and what's in the heart, right? What's in the heart is what's going to end up mattering in the end. And that's what we got to make sure we pay attention to. Verse 23 and 24, he then moves into another section. He says, if you're presenting a sacrifice, right, they would present different sacrifices this at the temple, and they had, one of them was a yearly sacrifice that they had to give. And what's the backstory on a lot of this is we need to remember, right, is people would travel for days to do this. And so he says, if you're at the temple to offer a sacrifice, and he says, you suddenly remember that you have someone that has something against you, leave your sacrifice at the altar, go and be reconciled with that person, and then come back and offer your sacrifice to God. And so this is one of the things that I want us to focus on, because I think we lose the meaning in here. He was saying, look, if you've traveled a week to come offer a sacrifice, and you've got something against, or someone has something against you, you need to go fix that first before you even offer a sacrifice. And see, back then, offering a sacrifice was a really, really big deal. It was a huge thing. It was one of the more important things that you did. But he's saying, look, fixing this relationship over here is more important than coming and worshiping me, right? I've heard it described as the horizontal, right? The horizontal is more important than the vertical. And what I mean by that is, we tend to, as Christians, put a more focus and more emphasis on the vertical, being worshiping God, right? And our relationship with God, and making sure that's more important. And Jesus is saying, no, if you want our relationship, the vertical, to be healthy, then you need to make sure the horizontal looks right. Because if the horizontal isn't good, if your relationships with other people isn't good, then our relationship can't be good. And we need to remember that, because I have seen people who will put such an emphasis on the fact that they were at church every Sunday, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I've heard funerals like, well, that person was in the church building every time the door was open. But yeah, they were a butthead, right? They were mean and hateful to people all the time. But they were in the church every time. So what? It doesn't matter. And that's what Jesus is saying is, look, if it doesn't matter what you come to me with, right? It does, worshiping me is not more important than making sure that your relationships are right with people. And so we've got to get this done, because this is a direct command from God. And he's saying, look, how you treat people and your relationship with other people is more important than the vertical. If you want our relationship to be good, you need to have good relationships with other people. If you don't, then our relationship's not going to be good. And it's that simple, right? Going to church and singing a bunch of songs to him, and that kind of stuff doesn't make your relationship any better. And so we need to remember that. And we definitely need to make sure we practice this. And again, this was another challenge to the Pharisees, and honestly, it's a challenge to the way we think nowadays, because such an emphasis is put on being in a church building, right, on a particular day. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not the most important thing. And that's hard for us, because we've been taught all of our lives that being in the church building and worshiping God is the most important thing we do, and it's not. How we treat other people and how we behave during the other 6 days of the week, that's the most important thing. And that's hard for us to grasp sometimes, but that's what Jesus teaches here. And so then we get into verses 25 and 26, and it says, you know, when you're on your way to court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may have you handed over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you'll be thrown in prison. And if this happens, you surely won't be free, and again, until you've paid every last penny. And again, back in this day, if someone couldn't pay a debt, they were thrown in prison until they could pay the debt. Well, it's kind of hard to pay a debt when you're in prison, right? And so unless someone came and paid it for you, a lot of times you'd be in jail for the rest of your life. And so we need to, make sure that, what he's saying here is fix problems before they get out of hand, right? If you got an issue, don't, so many times we see this in the real world, we see this in churches, like something small will happen. instead of just sitting down and trying to resolve it, you just blow it out of hand. They'll go and talk and gossip over here, and people go and gossip over here. And instead of actually going and coming to the person who it's about, they'll spend all their time gossiping about it, and then lies get thrown in, and all that other stuff gets thrown in, and then it becomes a blown up mess when it shouldn't have been, right? And so this is the thing, and this is where we as Christians we should not, we should never believe something just because someone come and told us. Did you hear about so and so? Well, most of those you should say, I don't need to hear it, But a lot of times, if you hear it, you need to go talk to that person. I need to find out if that's actually true, because I know that person's character, and I need to go talk to them. And so that you that's how relationships should be fixed, and how they should work, and things get resolved quickly, right? Instead of just blown out of proportion, and then it just blows up so big. Then it's like you at that point, there a lot of times it's almost you can't even repair it because it's so bad. And so we've got to make sure we're careful in that, and we don't get caught up in that. And so, our disagreements may not take us to court, but I'm telling you, if you've ever been in a scenario where you've got to go to court sometimes, man, a lot of times it'd have been a lot better if you resolved it before it went to court, right? That's why you see a lot of people take plea deals, right? Because a lot of times I take a plea deal, right? It'll be a lot better than if I don't. And so it's kind of, not all that lines up with plea deals if you're guilty. But again, he's saying just resolve things quickly. Don't let them get out of hand. And in a broader sense here, these verses are advising us to get things right with our brothers and sisters before we have to stand again before God, like I was just talking about in verse 23 and 24, right? Because if you don't get that stuff fixed, man, I would not want to stand before God knowing that I had lied about someone, spread rumors about someone, or treated someone, poorly, and didn't go talk to them. I wouldn't want to be that person, because God's saying that, that we're going to get into some later things, and God's going to say, you should have fixed that stuff before you got in front of me. And so again, that's going to be rough, I think, sometimes when we get that. Now, grace is going to cover a lot of things, but we've got to be careful we don't get so caught up in our egos and our own stuff that we end up, not being willing to forgive people, or go and talk to people, or forgive people for things that we may not like. And so again, that's hard. That's hard for me, man. I tell you, someone does me wrong, I want to, if you hurt me a little bit, I want to hurt you and hit you tenfold. It's just that human nature. And so we've got to make sure we don't get caught up in that version of anger, and let anger control us, because it will, man. I've seen people who just anger has, like, whatever, something's happened in their life, they're angry, and that anger just controls their entire life, and it becomes who they are. And you can see it, like, you look at them and you can just tell they're an angry person, and in a way you feel sorry for them, because that then becomes what they're all about. And so anger can take over, and it's a mindset. You have to purposefully control your thoughts. So Jesus is talking about here in the very beginning. It's like, if you even think it, then you're guilty of it. And so, we've got to make sure we control our thoughts. If we control our thoughts, we're going to move in the direction of our strongest thoughts. And so our strongest thoughts need to be not on anger, on forgiveness, right? Not on getting even, but showing mercy and justice, and then those type of things. And if you focus on that and focus on God, then anger won't be an issue. You don't need to focus on your anger. You need to let it go and give it to God, and then focus on the positive, as much as we can as humans. And so, again, this is the Jesus' teachings on anger. I think we need to go through that a couple of times, really pay close attention to what he's saying with us, and don't get caught up in anger and let it control you, because, man, it can lead you down a really bad path. So again, I really appreciate y'all continue to watch these videos. Please ask you to share them if you think it would be helpful to someone, and like I've asked in most of them, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We're going to keep pushing this stuff. You'll get notifications when we send out videos, and as always, I appreciate you for watching.